Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Talking about poetry, we may ask about the definition of poetry. What is poetry? Well, actually, there hasn't been exact definition about poetry, just like literature. I will just read the definition taken from Writer's Encyclopedia. Poetry, the oldest form of literature and the first to be put into written form, an extremely complex and subjective concept. Poetry cannot be completely or precisely defined. It is generally agreed, however, that poetry as a literary form expresses through extraordinary use of language. So, we could see that definition provides us understanding that we cannot define precisely about the definition of poetry. So if we cannot do that, if we cannot define poetry, how could we consider whether a work is poem or poetry or not? Let's take a look. We agree that it's an expression, the way authors or poets express their ideas with the extraordinary use of language, but it is not just an expression. Why? Because if a work is regarded as poetry, it has to provide several aspects. The first is the use of language itself. We still remember that literature has licentia poetica, the rights of author to use language he likes in order to express his ideas, which is sometimes against the rules of a language itself. Second, also imagery, figurative language, the way author expresses objects, actions, ideas through giving imagination to the readers. Let's say we have known some of them as metaphors, similes, personification, and the others. And then even though it has been with these aspects of language, sometimes we cannot easily think or consider that as a poem. Why? Because it still has to provide more the patterns and also the sound. Patterns is like the structure. What are they? Okay, let's take a look on this one. Poetry has lines, verse, stanza. Lines, it's just lines. When you write something and then it has lines. Verse, many people are still confused about what verse, whether it is line or no. Yeah, sometimes a verse could be line, but sometimes it is some lines. I mean, when it has been a completely an idea or let's say a sentence for normal text, that's verse. And stanzas are groups of lines in poetry. It means that we can record that like a paragraph in a poem or poetry. So these terms are just some parts of poetry, because we still have many others, like the use of language to provide aesthetic values, in which I will give three examples, common examples for explaining about poetry. First, rhyme, rhythm. Second, and meter. What is rhyme? We know that it's like repetition of sound that occurs normally at the end of lines, but sometimes it could be in the middle of the lines. Let's say A B A B. I mean, or A B B. I will read an example. I saw a fairy in the wood. He was dressed all in green. He drew his sword while I just stood and realized I had been seen. So we have would, green, stood, seen. Would, green, stood, seen. It means that it's like A, B, A, B. Okay, but we also have internal rhymes. I mean, the repetition happens in the middle of the line. For example, whilst all the night through fog smoke white. Whilst all the night, night through fog smoke white. Night and white. That's an example of rhyme. And then we have also rhythm. Rhythm is like the beat of the poem. And to do so, we have to make sure the meter. What is meter? It's like the feet of the beat or the syllable. I will give you an easy example. We have some types, many types of meter. I will give you two examples. First is iamb or iambic, and second is trochaic, trochaic or trochaic. Iambic means that the syllables is from unstressed with stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. This is an example. Behave, betray, behave, betray. So unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. And then a trochaic. It's like a stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. Candle, candle, a muscle, candle, muscle. So good poem has to provide or has to be written in a good form, considering not only the use of language, the symbols, the imagery or the figurative language, but also the meter, the structure of the sound. And this is general example. This is general explanation about poetry. I will give a further explanation how we cannot separate forms or rules to regard something as poetry or not by paying attention on these two. First is sonnet. Sonnet is popular in Europe or like let's say by Shakespeare or other great author. And to make something to be sonnet, it has to be written in 14 lines. So if it is not written in 14 lines, whatever beautiful, whatever meaningful, or whatever full of symbols the poetry is, it couldn't be regarded as sonnet. And it's not enough. The 14 lines have to be in 10 syllables for each line. I mean, the 14 lines consist of 10 syllables in each line. So if it is not like this, we cannot say that as sonnet. Another example comes from Japan. We have classic poem or poetry written by Japanese people that is known as haiku. And in making haiku, it has to be written in 3 lines, and the first line has to be in 5 moras. Second line has to be in 7 moras, and the third line has to be written in 5 moras. What is moras? What is mora or moras? It's just like syllables. It means that if you write it in more than 3 lines, it cannot be considered as haiku. So that is the way, the first definition I read from Writer's Encyclopedia, that it's complex, and I could consider that a difficult and complicated form in literature. And another, usually modern poetry at present doesn't focus only on the form or the structure, because we have one type that is free verse. Free verse means that the verse is arranged, of the first verses are arranged not in exact form with let's say a particular meter or syllables or sound, rhyme, rhythm, etc. No, it is just like with the use of language, extraordinary use of language, that let's say with symbols or expressions on particular matter. Okay, I will give an example, an easy example taken from nursery rhymes, this kind of types of poetry, to make sure about the clear or version or a classic version of poetry should be like this. Many of you, I suppose, have known about this. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse went up the clock struck one, the mouse went down. Hickory dickory dock. It's like that. So it's for children, types of poem. Pay attention. The simple poem provides many aspects of poetry that I have explained before. Hickory dickory dock. What are these words? In poetry, it's considered to be onomatopoeia. What is it? It's like given a word that when it's read, it gives a sound to associate or to describe the word itself or the expression intended by the author. Hickory dickory dock. There are other analyses about this, but this is just the simple form. And then after that, we pay attention on the rhyme. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse went up the clock struck one, the mouse went down. Dock clock, one down. So it's A-A-B-B. Get it? A-A-B-B. So this is the rhyme. So what is that enough? No, it still provides more. For example, like this, if we pay attention on the what is it, meter, we could say hickory dickory dock. So stressed, unstressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, unstressed. What is this? This is tactile. It means that the structure is like this. It's stressed syllable followed by unstressed, unstressed. So the second one, is it the same? The mouse went up the clock. The mouse went up the clock. The mouse went up the clock. So it's iamb or iambic. Unstressed, stressed. Unstressed, stressed. The mouse went up the clock. The mouse went up the clock. Okay. So the third line is like the clock. It depends on the way you read this. If you read just like this, you could consider that as like the clock struck one. But sometimes if you read that with a song, it could be different. The clock struck one. Disregarding about that, I consider this as like irregular. Or sometimes could be iambic. This one iambic, but sometimes irregular because it could be stressed like this: struck one or struck one. Sometimes different with struck one. No, but struck one or struck one. So I consider that it's irregular. And then the mouse went down. The mouse went down. The mouse went down. So it's iambic or iambic. So this is what I mean by characteristics or characters a poetry has. So when you pay attention on a work and it provides these elements, not only an expression, you could consider that as poem. But if you only follow the definition of the previous ones, which belongs to free verse, sometimes as long as you consider that as with full of meanings, that's poetry. So that's why the first I opened this explanation by informing you that there hasn't been any precise or exact definition about poetry. So we also have types of poetry. Some experts believe 3, some others believe this one with this one, or some others believe all. Lyric, narrative, dramatic, descriptive. Lyric poetry that focuses on the expressions, emotions by the poet, his ideas, emotions, or given to the reader in his writing. Narrative, it's like a story inside the poem tells about a story. And then dramatic, it applies the elements of trema in the poetry. Descriptive is like the description of the world around the author. So these are types of poetry, and these are some aspects that you could use when you want to analyze whether something is a poem or not. And if you just like modern poet, when you express something or your ideas and use figurative language or symbols, and then without any good meter or rhyme rhythm, sometimes still it could be considered as a free verse. Why? Because again, I tell you that it cannot be completely or precisely defined. Just like Muhammad Ali said that me, we, that's it. Me, we. You can define that as a poem, or sometimes you cannot do that. It's up to you. Me, we. That's all for the explanation. Hopefully you understand that, and you can question me if you have question about this. Thank you.